They thought the stars were theirs. For 1,000 years, the empires of the void grew fat and complacent, their fleets gliding like gods between systems. Worlds bent knee, tribute flowed, and no voice dared whisper rebellion. And then came the humans. At first they were little more than a rumor, strange signals on the edge of mapped space, outposts going silent, freighters never arriving at port. The Council dismissed it as piracy or border raiders, nothing new, nothing worthy of concern. But the silence spread. System after system vanished from the trade networks. Colonies gone, entire garrisons erased. No wreckage, no distress calls, only void. The question echoed in every chamber of power. What could erase a world so quickly, so quietly? The answer arrived in the form of a single name, carried on desperate transmissions before they, too, were cut off. Humanity. The Council laughed at first. Another primitive species. Another fragile animal race crawling from its gravity well, proud of fire and metal. Nothing to fear, nothing to respect. They had seen it before hundreds of times, and every time the newcomers were broken, their worlds stripped bare, their species folded into servitude. But the laughter did not last, because the reports kept coming. Not of humans begging for mercy, but of humans advancing. Not of chains and collars, but of warships. The first encounter was supposed to be easy, a flotilla of veteran cruisers dispatched to teach the primitives their place. When they emerged from jump space over the colony called, they expected surrender. They expected fear. Instead, they found silence. The human fleet waited for them, black silhouettes against the burning star. No banners, no signals, no diplomatic overtures, just steel. Cold, silent, watching. The commander of the flotilla demanded their compliance, demanded tribute, demanded the ritual submission of a lesser race. And then he made a mistake. He threatened Earth. The humans answered at last, one transmission. A single voice, calm and steady. Try. No more words were spoken. The first exchange of fire was brutal. Beams and plasma lanced across the void, a storm of light and fury. The alien flotilla, veterans of a dozen wars, expected the humans to crumble under the onslaught. But the human ships did not crumble. They advanced. Hull plating that should have cracked held fast. Weapons that should have failed burned brighter. And when they fired back, entire cruisers vanished in silence, their hulls ripped apart as though the void itself had swallowed them. The survivors fled. Few escaped. Those who did carried tales of terror back to the stars. And for the first time in centuries, the Council felt fear. Because it wasn't just the weapons. It wasn't just the ships. It was the humans themselves. They fought like creatures with nothing to lose. Like beings who had stared into extinction before and learned to smile at it. Every maneuver spoke of desperation, honed into brilliance. Every strike carried a defiance no empire could understand. And when the battle ended, the humans did not chase the fleeing survivors. They simply turned, gathered their dead, and disappeared back into the dark. No plunder, no conquest, no gloating. Only silence. That silence spread faster than the war itself. Because the other species, predators, conquerors, rulers of empires, could not understand. What kind of race fights not for dominion but for something deeper? What kind of people wage war not to enslave, but to ensure no one ever enslaves them again? The humans had spoken only one word that day. But across the stars, it echoed like a death sentence. Try. And every empire, every admiral, every ruler of the void asked themselves the same question. If this is how they fight on the edge of their space, what happens when humanity comes for us? They gathered in silence. In the grand chamber of the council, where wars had been plotted and empires carved, the air was heavy with fear. Species that had not known humility in centuries now sat uneasily, their voices hushed, their eyes fixed on the flickering holofeeds of defeat. Ships reduced to wreckage, fleets torn apart, and in every recording the same impossible truth. The humans had not run. Admirals debated excuses. Perhaps it was luck. Perhaps it was stolen technology. Perhaps their numbers had been overestimated, their strength exaggerated by frightened survivors. But the silence of the room told another truth. The oldest among them, veterans of forgotten wars, recognized the look in human eyes, the steady calm before the charge, the refusal to kneel. This was not luck. This was not chance. This was a species built for war. Still, the council clung to arrogance. Every empire believes itself eternal. Every ruler believes their throne unshakable. So they told themselves what they needed to believe, that humanity could be contained, that their defiance could be broken. And so they sent another fleet, larger, stronger, entire battle groups drawn from 3 empires, enough force, they thought, to remind the humans of their place. But while the fleets prepared, whispers spread through the lower ranks. Soldiers spoke of the humans in hushed tones, as if nomming them too loudly might invite doom. Some refused to deploy, feigning illness. Others asked a dangerous question aloud. What if the stories are true? The council crushed dissent, but unease grew, because no one could explain the humans. How had they advanced so quickly? How had they built ships that resisted weapons refined over centuries? And most of all, why did they fight with such fury, such absolute devotion, when surrender would have preserved them? A young strategist voiced the unthinkable. Perhaps they are not fighting for conquest or for empire. Perhaps they fight for survival. A people who have stared at extinction would see war differently than we do. The chamber turned on him with scorn. Survival? That was the struggle of primitives, of animals clawing at the dirt of there. The empires had such weakness long ago. But the seed of doubt had been planted. For the first time in generations, the great powers looked inward. They remembered their own beginnings, when their ancestors had clawed against hunger, against cold, against the dark. They had forgotten what it was to fight as if tomorrow depended on it. The humans had not forgotten. The humans lived it still. And so the Second Fleet sailed. The empires called it a demonstration of power. But those who watched from the shadows, those who carried unease in their hearts, called it something else. A test. Not of weapons, not of tactics. A test of will. When the fleet emerged from jump space over the contested system, the humans were waiting again. Not more numerous, not stronger, simply waiting, silent, watching. The admiral of the fleet broadcast demands, warnings, threats. The humans did not respond, not a word. And then, without ceremony, they advanced. The void lit with fire, hulls split, cruisers died screaming into the dark. Every formation, every strategy the empires had refined over centuries failed. Again. But this time, the survivors saw something new. Between the chaos and the fire, they saw humans pulling each other from wreckage, covering retreats, sacrificing ships not for victory but for one another. No one left behind. No one forgotten. The aliens did not understand it. They had armies of slaves, expendable and countless. Soldiers were tools, not kin, but the humans. The humans fought as if every life mattered. And somehow, that made them unstoppable. When the Second Fleet limped home, broken and humiliated, the Council could no longer deny the truth. Humanity was not another primitive race to be conquered. They were something else, something dangerous. And yet, in their darkest chambers, another question grew louder with every whispered report. If they are not fighting for conquest, what are they fighting for? They thought a prisoner would bring answers. One voice, one mind. They believed if they could break a single human, they could unravel the species itself. So when the Second Great Fleet limped home in ruin, clutching fragments of wreckage, the Council seized upon a prize. A lone survivor plucked from the shattered hull of a corvette. The human was dragged in chains before them, tall, bloodied, silent. His uniform scorched, his skin split by fire and steel, yet his eyes steady, watching. The Council expected begging, pleading, a primitive creature desperate for life. Instead, the human smiled. The chamber fell silent. Predators who had broken worlds recoiled at the sight of teeth bared not in fear, but in defiance. One elder leaned forward. "You will tell us why your kind fights, why you resist, why you do not kneel when every other species has bent the knee. Speak." The human said nothing. They tortured him subtly at first. Isolation, hunger, heat, and cold. They expected him to crack. Instead, he laughed. A low, rasping laugh that unsettled even the guards. Days turned to weeks. Interrogators rotated, each more cunning than the last. They offered rewards, mercy, even freedom. Nothing broke him. Finally, the council grew desperate. They assembled in full, hoping that in the grandeur of their chamber, before the rulers of half the stars, the human would finally bend. They asked again, "Why do you fight? What drives you to challenge the order of the void? Why do you resist the inevitable?" The human lifted his head. His voice was weak, raw from silence, but the words carried like thunder. "Because we remember." The chamber stirred. He spoke again, slower this time. "We remember the cold that almost killed us. We remember the beasts that hunted us. We remember wars that should have ended us. Famine, fire, plague, extinction breathing down our necks for 100,000 years. Every time we should have died, but we didn't. We learned, we endured, we fought." His eyes locked on the council, unblinking. "You think this is war? For us, this is survival, and survival is all we've ever known." Silence, the kind that suffocates. The council dismissed his words as bravado, the desperate rambling of a cornered animal. Yet when they looked into his eyes, they saw no desperation, only truth. The human was executed in secret. The council feared his words more than his weapons. They feared the spark they might ignite if repeated. But fear could not silence memory. Because among the guards and attendants, whispers had already spread. They spoke of the man who did not break, the prisoner who smiled through pain, the creature who died on his feet, unbent, unbroken. And as those whispers moved through fleets and colonies, something unexpected happened. The empires felt doubt. For the first time, their soldiers wondered, if this is only one human, what are they all like? Meanwhile, far from the council chambers, in the quiet reaches of uncharted space, the humans prepared. Their fleets grew, their weapons sharpened, their resolve deepened. They did not seek conquest, they did not seek glory. They sought only one thing: to ensure no empire, no council, no master would ever chain them again. And in their silence, in their patience, in their defiance, they became the thing the empires feared most. Not conquerors, not saviors, but survivors. Survivors who had turned survival into an art of war. And the stars themselves began to whisper. What happens when such a species stops merely defending and begins to strike back? The empires had always believed war was theirs to choose. They struck first, they dictated terms, they decided when battles began and when they ended. But the humans changed that. It began with whispers, a listening post gone, a fuel depot silent, patrol ships vanishing one after another, their signals cut mid-transmission. The council called it sabotage, pirates, malfunction, anything but what it was. Until the colony had burned. The skis over that world lit with fire as human warships emerged from the dark, silent and merciless. Not in numbers, not in overwhelming force, just a handful of black steel predators that fell upon the defenses with precision. The defenders fought, they always did, but the humans didn't come like conquerors, they didn't lay siege, they didn't demand surrender. They came like executioners. Orbital batteries fell first, silenced in minutes. Command hubs followed. The garrison, veterans of campaigns across the stars, scrambled in confusion, only to find their ships already burning in dock, their fleets annihilated before they could rise. And then, as suddenly as they had come, the humans. They didn't stay. They didn't occupy. They didn't plant flags. They left only ruin and silence. The survivors spoke of precision, of ships that struck from angles no computer predicted, of weapons that cut through shields like they were paper. They spoke of crews fighting to the last, ramming their vessels into enemy hulls rather than surrender. But what haunted them most was not the fire. It was the aftermath. When the smoke cleared, they found bodies. Human bodies, pulled from wreckage by their comrades before retreat. Every corpse retrieved, every fallen carried home. The aliens could not understand. In their wars, the dead were discarded, forgotten, buried beneath rubble. But the humans carried their dead as if each one was a treasure. And it shook the survivors more than any weapon. Because what kind of species fights with such ferocity, yet still weeps for every loss? What kind of people burn worlds and still whisper prayers over the ashes? The council panicked. Armies were mobilized. Fleets recalled from the edges of empire. Never had the rulers of the stars moved with such haste, such desperation. But haste could not hide the truth. For the first time in memory, they were not the hunters. They were the hunted. And across the void, in the dark where human fleets gathered, another truth was forged. Humanity had learned. From every war, every invasion, every tyrant that had tried to break them, they had taken one lesson. Do not wait for the enemy to come. Carry the fire to their door. The galaxy was vast, filled with empires that thought themselves eternal. But to humanity, vastness meant nothing. They had crossed oceans before there were stars. They had looked into endless horizons and whispered the same word again and again. Forward. And so they moved forward, quiet, relentless, a tide no fleet could hold back. The aliens whispered of monsters in the dark, of shadows that struck without warning, but those who survived knew better. They weren't monsters. They weren't shadows. They were human. And for the first time, the empires of the void realized something they had never dared consider. If humanity could do this on the edge of the galaxy, if they could strike so deep, so quickly, so decisively, what would happen when they turned their gaze upon the heart of empire? Fear does strange things to rulers. For centuries, the council had spoken with one voice, their empires united by power, by arrogance, by the certainty that nothing could shake their dominion. But the humans shook it. Now in the grand chambers where laws were written and wars declared, whispers replaced commands. Accusations replaced strategy. Every empire blamed another. Some claimed sabotage, others claimed cowardice. And beneath it all was a single truth no one dared speak aloud. They were losing. One by one, outposts fell silent. Fleets scattered. Colonies burned. The humans did not conquer, but they did not relent. They struck with the precision of a blade, always where the council was weakest, always vanishing before retaliation arrived. No one knew how they chose their targets. No one understood how they crossed such distances unseen. And worst of all, no one could predict when they would come again. Paranoia bloomed. Rulers turned inward, demanding loyalty oaths from their admirals, fearing betrayal more than the enemy. Armies meant for the front lines were redirected to guard thrones. Fleets meant to patrol the stars now orbited capital worlds, protecting their masters while the border burned. And still the humans advanced. One senator dared voice the forbidden thought. Perhaps we should talk to them, he said. Perhaps humanity can be reasoned with. He was silenced before the chamber, publicly disgraced, stripped of title, cast out. But the seed had already taken root. If humanity could not be defeated, then perhaps survival meant bending the knee. Whispers spread among lesser worlds. Vassal races, long ground beneath the council's heel, heard the stories of human defiance. They heard of fleets shattered, of empires trembling, and they asked themselves, if the humans can defy the masters of the galaxy, why can't we? The council sensed rebellion rising. Fear turned to desperation. Desperation turned to cruelty. Entire colonies purged at the slightest hint of unrest, fleets sent not against humans but against their own subjects. And in the shadows, humanity watched. Every execution, every atrocity, every desperate act to maintain control, it only fed their resolve. For humanity knew a truth the council had forgotten. An empire afraid of its own people is already dying. The breaking point came quietly. A delegation from the Dominion arrived late to the chamber, their robes torn, their voices shaking. Their border had fallen, entire systems gone dark. The humans had not merely struck them, they had dismantled them piece by piece until nothing remained but silence. The Dominion demanded aid, demanded fleets, demanded vengeance. But no one moved. For every empire feared the same fate, and in that hesitation, in that silence, the unity of the council cracked. The Dominion from the chamber, not in dignity, but in rage. Others followed. One empire after another pulled back its fleets, not to fight humanity, but to defend its own borders. The council was breaking. The unity that had ruled the stars for centuries was gone, replaced by fear, by selfishness, by the quiet knowledge that the end was no longer a possibility, but an inevitability. And above it all, unspoken but undeniable, was the question that haunted every ruler, every admiral, every soldier staring into the dark. If the humans had already broken the unity of the council, what would they do next? The empires thought they had finally cornered them. For months, human fleets had struck like ghosts, vanishing before retaliation could land. But now, in the bleak system of the trap was set. 3 armadas. Thousands of ships. Every empire that still had pride left poured its strength into the void. A hammer so vast, so heavy, that no species in history could withstand its blow. And against them, only one human fleet. Scouts reported less than 100 ships. Sleek, black, outnumbered 50-1, it was laughable, it was hopeless, it was certain. The admirals of the council declared the end before the first shot was fired. Humanity would be crushed here, its defiance burned from the stars. But when the fleets emerged into the system, the humans did not flee. They did not hide. They waited. Silent watching. The order was given. The void ignited. Beams of fire and oceans of plasma surged toward the humans, enough power to crack a moon in half. And yet when the light cleared, the humans still advanced. Shields flared, hulls cracked, ships died, but they did not retreat. They drove forward straight into the storm, like wolves charging into fire. The council could not understand. Every instinct screamed retreat, survival, but the humans ignored instinct. They chose defiance. Their ships moved with impossible precision, weaving between giants, striking at weak points no one else would dare target. A cruiser rammed headlong into a battleship 3 times its size, tearing both apart in fire. A corvette, engines failing, hurled itself into the heart of an enemy carrier, silencing its squadrons forever. Every loss hurt, every sacrifice bled, but every death bought another victory. And then the trap revealed itself. From the dark side of Shattered Moon, a second human fleet emerged, twice the size of the first, hidden, waiting. The council armadas, already tangled, already straining against the madness of human tactics, now found themselves flanked. Strikes rained from every angle, chaos blooming like wildfire. For hours the void was nothing but fire and screams, but through it all one truth became clear. The humans should have lost. By every calculation, they should have been crushed. And yet they endured, because their strength was not in numbers, not in ships, not even in weapons. It was in will. They fought as if the destruction of their species stood behind them, as if retreat meant extinction. They fought not for conquest, not for empire, but for each other. And in that furnace of chaos, the impossible happened. The council's grand armadas broke. First in formation, then in discipline, and finally in spirit. Vessels fled. Admirals abandoned command. What was meant to be the end of humanity became the end of unity among the empires. When the smoke cleared, half the council's strength was gone. Entire fleets reduced to drifting husks. Survivors limped home with terror etched into their bones. The humans had paid dearly. Their dead numbered in the thousands, ships shattered, crews lost. But every body was carried home, every sacrifice remembered, and the survivors, they stood unbroken. In the silence after the battle, One truth spread faster than fire across the stars. Humanity could not be crushed. They could only be resisted for now. And in the ashes of as fleets limped away and the void grew quiet again, one question burned in every mind. If this was humanity fighting outnumbered against the full strength of the Council, what would happen when humanity truly gathered its strength? The flames of had not yet cooled when the galaxy changed forever. It began with whispers, quiet voices hidden in the dark, speaking of a people who had faced the impossible and refused to bow. The slaves heard it first. The broken, the conquered, the forgotten, entire species who had bent their backs beneath the Council's yoke for generations. They heard of human fleets outnumbered 100 to 1 and yet victorious. They heard of soldiers who died with a smile, who carried their dead so none were left behind. And they asked themselves the question their masters had always feared. If the humans can stand, why can't we? The whispers grew into sparks. The sparks into flames. On distant mining worlds, chains were shattered. Overseers found their weapons turned against them. Garrisons burned. Flags of empire were torn down, replaced not with the banners of humanity, but with something older, something hope. The Council tried to crush the uprisings, fleets diverted, soldiers dispatched, but for every fire they stamped out, 3 more erupted. Because this was no longer about humans. This was about the galaxy itself remembering what it had forgotten, the will to resist. Entire species that had once cowered began to rise. Though their songs of defiance long silenced, sang again as they drove their conquerors into the sea. Though their wings once clipped, darkened the skies of their in freedom's storm. Even the smallest, the weakest, those who had been told they were nothing more than tools, lifted their heads and whispered one word that echoed like thunder. No. And everywhere they spoke the same name. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as inspiration. Humanity. The Council was unraveling. What had taken to build collapsed in months. Armies, fleets refused orders. The empires, once gods among the stars, now found themselves besieged not by humans alone, but by their own subjects. The rulers screamed that it was humanity doing, that the humans had seeded rebellion, orchestrated revolt. But in truth, humanity did nothing. They did not command these uprisings. They did not lead them. They did not need to. Their example was enough. For when a single candle is lit in the dark, others see its flame and light their own. In the void, human fleets continued their relentless advance. But now, wherever they struck, they did not find only fear. They found allies. Refugees carried them intelligence. Dissidents opened gates. Entire populations rose to fight alongside them, not for conquest, but for freedom. The empires called it contagion, a plague of rebellion. They were right, but it was not a sickness, it was a cure. Still, fear remained. Because though rebellions spread, though empires crumbled, though the Council teetered on collapse, one truth haunted the galaxy. No one yet knew what humanity wanted. They had not claimed territory. They had not built thrones upon conquered worlds. They struck, they carried their dead, and they vanished into the dark. And so the question burned, louder than ever before. If humanity could ignite rebellion without trying, what would happen when they finally chose their destiny? The Council chamber was silent. Once its walls had echoed with the voices of rulers who claimed eternity. Once its floor had been polished with the weight of empires. But now it was cracked and empty, its banners burned, its armies scattered. What remained of the Council sat in shadows. Not gods, not masters, only frightened creatures clinging to thrones that no longer held power. And then the humans arrived. Not in fleets, not with weapons raised, but with a single ship, gliding into the capital's orbit like a shadow against the stars. The delegates expected demands, they expected conquest, they expected chains of their own. Instead, the humans sent one envoy, a woman unarmed, her uniform plain, her presence steady. She stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by rulers who had enslaved a galaxy, and spoke in a voice that carried further than any fleet. You wanted to know why we fight." Her words fell into silence. No one dared interrupt. "We fight because we must, because survival is written into us. Because every hardship, every trial, every near extinction forged us into what we are. We fight because we refuse to kneel, not to you, not to anyone." She looked at them one by one, until every ruler felt the weight of her gaze. "You believe power is measured in how many worlds you hold, how many ships you command, how many slaves you control. You are wrong. Power is not in dominion. Power is in endurance. Power is in standing when the universe itself tries to break you." Her words struck harder than weapons, for these rulers who had never fought for survival could not understand what it meant to endure. "We did not come here to rule you," she said, her voice quiet, steady, unshakable. "We came to tell you one truth. Humanity will never be slaves. Humanity will never kneel. Try to chain us and we will burn your chains. Try to break us and we will break you instead. Remember this, for as long as stars burn, as long as the void endures." And then she left. No threats. No conquests. No throne claimed. Only truth. The humans departed, and with them the last illusion of council power crumbled. The galaxy was free to decide its fate, rebellions rising, empires falling, vassals choosing their own path. Humanity had not become rulers. They had become something far greater. A spark. A reminders. A warnings. For across the stars, in every world that had once despaired, the stories spread. Stories of fleets outnumbered 100 to 1, standing unbroken. Stories of prisoners who smiled through pain. Stories of warships that came not for conquest but for freedom. The empires called it terror. The oppressed called it hope. And in the centuries to come, one truth endured in every tongue, every song, every whispered prayer. When humanity came to the stars, they did not bring chains. They brought fire. And fire cannot be conquered. It spreads. It endures. It lights the dark. And so the galaxy remembered. Not the fall of the council. Not the ruin of empires. But the day they first faced humanity's warships. And learned with awe and with terror that nothing in all the stars could ever make humanity kneel.